There is a silence that hurts more than any argument ever could. It is the silence that fills the space between two people who once knew how to reach each other. The messages that go unanswered, the looks that no longer carry warmth, the distance that grows without a single door being slammed. Something inside that person aches in a way that words cannot describe. Not grief exactly, not anger, but a strange hollowness that follows them into every room. They replay conversations, searching for the exact moment things shifted, wondering if there was a word said too harshly or a moment of softness that came too late. And in the middle of that exhausting search, a question rises that refuses to be silenced. Is it already too late to bring this back? That ache, that question, that unbearable weight, that is exactly where this begins. Most people believe that healing a broken relationship requires the right conversation, the perfect apology, or the exact combination of words that will finally make the other person understand. They rehearse speeches in the shower, craft messages they never send, and wait for the right moment that somehow never arrives. But the lessons learned reading the teachings of Neville Goddard quietly dismantle that belief with a precision that feels almost unsettling at first. The outer world, including the behavior, the distance, and the silence of another person, does not create the inner state. It reflects it. And if every external condition is a reflection, then the most radical act of healing is not found in the conversation that happens between two people, but in the consciousness that shifts within one. That single inversion changes everything about how a broken relationship is understood. There is something deeply honest about a person who refuses to give up on a connection that still matters to them. Not because they are desperate, but because something in them recognizes that what was shared was real, and real things do not simply vanish. The search for a way to restore that connection, even silently, even alone, is not weakness. It is a form of spiritual intelligence that most people never develop because they are too busy trying to control the surface of things. Neville Goddard understood something that very few teachers of his time were willing to say openly. The imagination is not a tool for escaping reality. It is the very mechanism through which reality is constructed. And a relationship, like all things, is built first in the unseen world of consciousness before it ever appears in the visible one. Consider for a moment what it would mean if the coldness being experienced from another person had nothing to do with that person at all. What if the distance, the silence, the walls that seem so solid and so final were simply an image, a projection cast outward by an inner state that has not yet been revised? How many times has a person changed their words, their tone, their approach, and found that the same dynamic keeps returning in a different form? The pattern does not repeat because the other person is impossible. It repeats because the inner assumption that generated the pattern has not been touched. This is one of the most unsettling and liberating ideas in all of Neville Goddard's teachings. The other person in any relationship is, in a profound sense, a reflection of one's own state of consciousness. Not a puppet, not a projection without dignity, but a mirror, showing with faithful precision what is being held inside. And a mirror cannot change until what stands before it changes first. This is not a comfortable idea for someone sitting in the middle of a silence they did not choose. But comfort is rarely where transformation begins. What Neville Goddard pointed to, in every lecture, every book, every conversation, was a kind of inner authority that most people have been trained to forget they possess. The authority to revise not the memory of what happened, but the feeling that memory carries, until a new inner fact is established so firmly that the outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself around it. Is it possible that the relationship that feels so broken on the outside has simply been waiting for something to shift on the inside? Is it possible that healing does not require permission from the other person, only a revolution in the one who is willing to go first? That willingness, quiet and powerful, is the first word in a language that needs no voice to be heard. There is a man who spent 7 months trying to fix what he had broken with the person he loved most. He wrote letters that were never delivered, rehearsed phone calls that never happened, and asked mutual friends for advice that only deepened his confusion. Every strategy pointed outward, toward her behavior, her silence, her walls, as if the solution lived somewhere in her responses. But the relationship did not begin to shift until the night he stopped trying to reach her and started asking a different question entirely. Not, what can I say to change this? But, what am I carrying inside that keeps this frozen in place? That question cracked something open in him that no conversation had been able to reach. And in that crack, something ancient and quiet began to breathe again. The mind that is trained to look outward for solutions will exhaust itself trying to solve an inner problem with outer tools. It will analyze tone, timing, and strategy with the precision of someone trying to rearrange furniture in a house built on a fault line. Bruce Lipton's research on the biology of belief offers a fascinating confirmation of what Neville Goddard taught from a completely different direction. Lipton demonstrated that cells respond not to their environment but to the perception of their environment, meaning the body itself is governed by inner interpretation, not outer fact. A relationship operates the same way. It does not respond to what is said, but to the vibrational signature of what is genuinely believed and felt beneath the words. Two people can speak the kindest words imaginable to each other while holding incompatible inner states, and the distance between them will remain untouched. Silence, then, can carry more healing than speech, if the consciousness behind that silence has been transformed. What does it mean to hold someone in consciousness differently than the way they appear to the physical senses? It means choosing, with full awareness, to stop rehearsing the image of them as distant, cold, or lost, and beginning to inhabit the feeling of them as close, warm, and restored. Not as a denial of what is happening, but as a deliberate act of inner revision that Neville Goddard called sleeping in the end. The end is not the hope that things might improve someday. The end is the living, breathing, felt reality of connection already healed, held in consciousness with the same certainty one holds the memory of something that has already happened. The imagination, used this way, is not fantasy. It is the mold into which reality is poured. There is a question worth sitting with quietly. What would it feel like, right now, to know without any doubt that this relationship has already begun to heal? Not to think about it, not to wish for it, but to feel it, the way the body relaxes when something it has been bracing against finally releases. That feeling is not a reward given after healing occurs. According to the lessons learned reading the teachings of Neville Goddard, that feeling is the cause, the invisible first movement of every visible change. Most people have it completely reversed. They wait for the outer condition to shift so they can finally feel relief. But the shift in feeling must come first, held consistently enough and deeply enough that the outer world eventually conforms to it. This is not wishful thinking. It is the mechanics of consciousness operating exactly as it was designed to. And here is where the real challenge reveals itself, because holding a feeling of restoration while the outer evidence still speaks of distance requires a kind of inner discipline that is rarely discussed. It is easy to feel connection when connection is visible. Anyone can do that. The work Neville Goddard described is the work of feeling the invisible truth more vividly than the visible lie. Every time the mind returns to the image of what is broken, it reinforces the mold that keeps casting that same form into physical experience. Every time the inner state is revised, consciously, deliberately, persistently, a new mold begins to take shape in the unseen. What kind of courage does it take to stop feeding the story of separation and begin feeding the reality of reunion, even in silence, even alone? That courage is not rare. It is simply unrecognized in a world that mistakes action for power. The woman who had not spoken to her sister in 2 years did not break the silence with a phone call. She broke it in a room alone, at midnight, with no one watching and nothing outwardly changed. She stopped rehearsing what her sister had done wrong and began, for the first time, to feel what it would be like to receive a message from her, warm, unexpected, as if the silence had never been. She did not force the feeling or perform it. She simply allowed it to exist inside her, the way a flame exists inside a lantern, contained, quiet, and entirely real. 3 weeks later, a message arrived that used almost the exact words she had imagined. The outer world had simply caught up to the inner one. This is not magic, and it is not coincidence. It is the consistent operation of a principle that works whether or not a person believes in it, the same way gravity works regardless of anyone's opinion about it. The I am, that wordless awareness at the center of every human being, is not passive. It is constantly broadcasting a frequency into the field of reality, and reality is constantly responding to that frequency with matching forms. When the I am holds the assumption of a broken connection, it will find evidence of brokenness everywhere it looks. When the I am begins to hold the assumption of restoration, not as a future event but as a present inner fact, the field begins to reorganize around that new signal. Is there any relationship so far gone that the revision of one person's inner state could not begin to move it? The Book of Mark, chapter 11, verse 23 carries a teaching that Neville Goddard returned to again and again throughout his life. The verse says, "Whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith." The mountain is not a geological formation. The mountain is the cold silence of someone who once knew how to be warm, the wall that has grown between two people who once had none. Shall not doubt in his heart does not mean pretending the mountain is not there. It means holding the inner reality of its removal with more conviction than the outer reality of its presence. He shall have whatsoever he saith is not a promise about speaking words into the air. It is a declaration about the creative power of inner assumption, held without contradiction. The verse is not a prayer asking something to happen. It is a description of how reality already works for the one who understands the nature of consciousness. What Neville Goddard saw in that verse was the same thing he saw everywhere he looked in Scripture, a map of inner experience disguised as outer narrative. The mountain does not move because someone commands it loudly enough. It moves because the one standing before it has already settled, in the deepest room of their being, into the felt reality of a world where that mountain no longer exists. That settling, that inner stillness that holds a new assumption without grasping or forcing, is the most powerful act available to any human being. And it requires no audience, no agreement from the other person, no favorable external conditions to begin. It only requires the willingness to stop confirming the broken version of reality by rehearsing it endlessly inside the mind. How different would things look today if that rehearsal had been replaced, even for 1 hour, with the felt reality of what healing looks like? There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this understanding, the loneliness of knowing that no one else can do this inner work for the person who needs it. No therapist, no mediator, no perfectly timed conversation can reach into the interior and revise the assumption that keeps casting the same painful form into experience. That can only be done from the inside, in silence, in the place where the I Am lives before it ever speaks or acts. But that loneliness carries within it something extraordinary, the absolute confirmation that the power to heal this relationship was never outside to begin with. It was always here, in the one who is reading, in the one who is searching, in the one who refuses to accept that love, once real, is simply gone. Neville Goddard did not teach surrender to circumstances. He taught the radical responsibility of knowing that circumstances are the child, not the parent, of consciousness. And a child always reflects the state of the one who holds it. There is a moment in the healing of any relationship when the person doing the inner work begins to notice something subtle but undeniable. The anxiety that once accompanied every thought of the other person starts to loosen its grip. Not because anything visible has changed yet, but because the inner state has begun to stabilize around a new assumption. That stabilization is not the end of the process. It is the first sign that the process is working. The lessons learned reading the teachings of Neville Goddard point to this moment as the most important one, not the moment when the outer confirmation arrives, but the moment when the inner certainty no longer needs it. That shift from needing proof to resting in assumption is the turning point that most people miss because they stop too soon. They feel a little relief and interpret it as progress, then return immediately to checking the outer world for evidence, and the checking itself undoes the work. The I Am does not operate in the future. It only knows the present. And when a person asks, "When will this heal?" they are, without realizing it, placing healing permanently out of reach, because the question itself encodes the assumption that healing is not yet here. What Neville Goddard taught with extraordinary precision is that the imagination must be inhabited in the present tense, not aimed at the future like an arrow hoping to land somewhere far away. The felt sense of restoration, of warmth, of connection renewed, must be experienced now, in the body, in the breath, in the quiet room where no one else is watching. Is it uncomfortable to feel something that the physical senses are not yet confirming? Yes. Deeply. But that discomfort is not a sign that the work is failing. It is the friction of a new assumption pressing against an old one that has been in place for a long time. And friction, in the world of consciousness, is often the sound of something about to change. A river does not ask the landscape for permission to find its way to the sea. It simply moves according to its nature, and the landscape reshapes itself around the consistency of that movement. Consciousness works the same way. When an inner assumption is held with enough consistency and enough feeling, reality does not resist it indefinitely. It conforms to it, the way water conforms to the shape of whatever contains it. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a description of something that can be tested, observed, and repeated by anyone willing to do the interior work with genuine commitment. The person who holds the assumption of a healed relationship, not as a wish but as an inner fact, becomes like that river, moving with quiet certainty toward a destination that was chosen, not discovered. And the outer world, which seemed so fixed and so final, begins to show cracks of light where none appeared before. What makes this so difficult for most people is not the technique. The technique is simple. What makes it difficult is the accumulated emotional weight of everything that happened before this moment. The words that were said too sharply, the needs that went unmet, the silences that hardened into walls. All of that lives in the body as a memory with a feeling attached to it. And every time that memory is visited, the feeling fires again, and the assumption of brokenness is reinforced with fresh energy. Neville Goddard spoke of revision as one of the most transformative practices available to the awakened mind. Going back to the memory, not to relive it, but to rewrite the feeling it carries. Not to pretend nothing happened, but to deliberately reimagine the scene as it should have been, until the body begins to respond to the revised version with the same reality it once gave the painful one. Is it possible that the most broken memory in a relationship is also the most fertile ground for the deepest healing? This is the place where most teachings stop, because what comes next asks something genuinely radical of the person who wants to heal. It asks them to become, in their inner world, the version of themselves that already exists inside a healed relationship before a single visible thing has changed. Not to perform that version, not to pretend, but to genuinely inhabit it from the inside out, the way an actor does not describe a character but becomes one completely. The other person does not need to cooperate with this process. They do not even need to know it is happening. Because the work is not being done on them. The work is being done on the assumption, and the assumption is entirely within the reach of the one who holds it. What would it mean to wake up tomorrow morning and, before opening a single message or checking a single signal from the outside world, choose the felt reality of connection already restored? That choice, made in silence, made alone, is more powerful than any conversation that has ever been rehearsed and never sent. The moment a person genuinely accepts that their inner state is the origin of their outer experience, something irreversible happens inside them. They can no longer place the full weight of responsibility for their pain onto someone else without feeling the quiet dishonesty of that move. This is not blame directed inward, and it is not an invitation to shame. It is the recognition of a power so complete and so intimate that it cannot be delegated to anyone, not to another person, not to circumstances, not to time. Neville Goddard called this the law of assumption, and he taught it not as a burden but as the most liberating truth a human being could ever encounter. The one who understands this law stops waiting to be rescued and begins, quietly and deliberately, to rescue themselves. And in doing so, they become the very change they were hoping would come from somewhere outside. Consider the person who begins each morning by spending 5 minutes in the felt reality of a conversation that has not yet happened but already feels healed. They do not visualize it from a distance, as if watching a film of someone else's life. They step inside it, feeling the warmth of a tone that is familiar again, hearing in their imagination words that carry no tension, only ease. That practice does not feel dramatic or cinematic. It feels quiet, almost ordinary, and yet it is one of the most precise acts of creation available to a conscious human being. The imagination, inhabited with feeling and held without contradiction, begins to impress itself onto the fabric of experience in ways that defy simple explanation. What changes first is not the other person. What changes first is the quality of inner life that the other person is now being held within. There is a man who had not spoken with his father in 4 years, not because neither of them cared, but because neither of them knew how to cross the distance without risking more pain. He began, each night before sleep, to imagine sitting beside his father in the old kitchen, the way they used to, with nothing needing to be said. He did not imagine a reconciliation speech or a tearful apology. He imagined the ordinary warmth of presence, the sound of a chair moving, the smell of coffee, the feeling of being in the same room without armor. Within 6 weeks, his father called for the first time in years, and the conversation began exactly the way he had imagined it, quietly, without fanfare, as if the distance had simply dissolved on its own. The outer world had reflected back what the inner world had consistently held. What would it mean to trust that process deeply enough to give it 6 weeks of genuine, uninterrupted inner work? The most daring revelation in all of this is not that the imagination can influence reality. It is that the imagination has always been influencing reality, whether or not anyone was doing it consciously. Every assumption held about another person, every story repeated internally about who they are and what they are capable of, has been shaping the field between them without a single word being spoken. The person who believes, deep down, that a relationship is too damaged to recover will find that belief confirmed at every turn. Not because they are unlucky, but because the assumption is functioning exactly as it always has, casting its image outward and watching the world reflect it back. The question is not whether the imagination is at work. The question is whether it is being directed or simply inherited. And the moment that question is genuinely asked, the possibility of something new has already begun to take root. Every relationship that has ever been healed was first healed in the invisible world before anything moved in the visible one. Someone, somewhere, chose to hold a different inner reality long enough for the outer reality to catch up. They did not do it perfectly. They doubted. They revisited the old story. They felt the pull of evidence that pointed the other way. But they returned, again and again, to the felt sense of what was possible, until the possible became probable, and the probable became real. This is not a story about exceptional people with rare gifts. It is a story about a principle that operates the same way for everyone who applies it with sincerity. The teachings of Neville Goddard do not ask for perfection. They ask for persistence, for the willingness to revise the inner world one more time, even after doubt has visited. And that willingness, held quietly in the space between thoughts, is the most eloquent thing one human being has ever offered to another without saying a single word. Real connection holds a depth that distance alone cannot destroy. Beneath every silence, beneath every unanswered message, something still waits. Not naive hope, and not a refusal to face what happened. It is the original frequency two people shared before the walls went up. That frequency has not disappeared. It has grown quiet under unrevised assumptions. What looks permanently broken is often a connection buried under years of inner stories. And what is buried can be uncovered, not from the outside, but from within. The body holds what the mind is often too defended to admit. It carries the memory of ease, of warmth, of what it felt like to be truly known. And it can return to that feeling, not as nostalgia but as a living act of creation. When the body inhabits restored connection, even in silence, it changes what it transmits. That shift moves through the unseen space between two people with quiet precision. The I Am does not only think its assumptions. It broadcasts them into the surrounding field. And the field arranges itself, faithfully, around whatever signal it receives. A tree does not ask the earth for permission before deciding to grow roots. It simply moves in the direction of life and trusts what lies beneath. The one who revises their inner world without waiting for proof is like that tree. They do not ask the broken connection to demonstrate that healing is possible. They root themselves in the felt reality of what has already been made whole. And the world above the surface, slowly and without announcement, begins to rearrange. Because the roots have already moved toward something new. Every tradition that survived centuries carries some form of this truth. The inner world is not the prisoner of the outer one. The body, the mind and consciousness move together as a single unified field. Greg Braden documented how human emotion directly affects measurable physical reality. What Neville Goddard called spiritual law, science is beginning to confirm. The heart generates a field that extends beyond the body and touches everything near it. When that field carries the felt reality of healing, what is near begins to respond. There is a state of being available to anyone willing to enter it now. Not one that waits for outer confirmation or requires circumstances to align. Not one that asks the other person to change before it can begin. A state where the relationship that matters most is already held as whole and warm. What would shift inside, right now, if that state were entered for just one full minute? It asks only for the willingness to stop rehearsing the broken story one more time. In that pause, in that silence, the healing has already begun. There is a practice that asks only for stillness and genuine honesty. Not a mantra repeated without feeling, not a performance for the mind. A single phrase chosen because it carries real weight inside the body. Something simple enough to hold without effort or forcing. Words like, "We are already at peace," or, "The love between us is whole." Spoken once, quietly, with felt conviction placed gently behind them. Not a wish aimed at the future, but a truth chosen right now. The practice begins in the quietest part of the night or the morning. Before the mind fills with its familiar catalogue of worries and replays. A breath is taken, and then another, until the body settles. Then the phrase is introduced, not pushed, not demanded of the mind. Simply placed there, the way a candle is placed in a dark room. And for 1 full minute, nothing else is asked of anyone. Only that one quiet truth, held with as much sincerity as possible. If something here touched a place that rarely gets reached, that is not coincidence. The teachings of Neville Goddard find people exactly when they are ready. Those who feel something shifting are invited to stay close to this space. To subscribe, so that what is built here continues to unfold for them. And to share this with someone whose silence has lasted long enough. Because some truths do their deepest work when received in company. What would it mean to be the one who offered someone else this key? Every healing that seemed impossible began in the same invisible place. Not with the right words spoken at the perfect moment, but with a single inner revision, quiet and unseen, that shifted everything. The work does not announce itself or demand to be recognized. It moves the way light enters when a curtain is slowly pulled back. And the relationship that felt frozen begins, somewhere unseen, to turn. Is there anything more worth doing, in silence, than that? The silence that felt like an ending holds the seed of a new beginning. That is the truth Neville Goddard returned to in every form he found. The outer world is not the cause of inner life. It is its reflection. The one who knows this does not wait for the world to confirm their wholeness. They become whole first, in the quiet room of consciousness, without permission. A relationship does not need spoken words to begin its healing. It only needs one person, fully awake, holding a different truth without fear.